There's a cat sitting in my lap who decided to sit in my lap right before I recorded this. Okay, if you're watching this video, I presume you were sent here by the video I did on my main channel about the history and downfall of themed McDonald's. If you haven't watched that or you haven't finished it, I recommend going there and doing that first. There's a lot of context for this interview in that piece, and this video will frankly spoil a lot of really fun moments if you don't watch that first. Also, if you're new to this channel, don't forget to go down and hit subscribe. I'd really like to start using the second channel more often, but obviously it's hard to do that when no one knows that it exists, so I'm just trying to kind of build up a basic subscriber base. Anyways, here's the interview. So, hello everyone, welcome to the second channel, Quentin Retues. I'm here with a very special guest who I will allow to introduce themselves. Hello.
Hi, my name is Max Krieger, and among many other things, the most relevant thing today is that I'm the admin of Nonstandard McDonald's, a Twitter account which I did not expect to become as popular as it is, but here we are. It's the topic today. So, yeah, I guess I'm a relevant authority to consult on this, which is not something I expected I would be saying 6 months ago.
If you don't want to answer this one, it's outside your comfort zone. That's fine. I'm kind of curious, what's your life outside of the gimmick account? Because this surprised me. I've had I think at least one person be like, it's funny that you're talking with him because I've met him.
Oh, who is that? I'm curious.
I'd have to look up in my Discord, but someone was like, yeah, I did something. They mentioned some convention where I think you were working at the convention.
Oh yeah, I've gone to anime conventions for like a decade around the Midwest, so it's possible that we ran into each other at some point. By day, I'm a video game developer. I'm doing it for a salary now. I was an indie for a while. My last big indie project was a game called CROSSNIQ Plus on the Nintendo Switch that came out, it came out in October of 2019. That's a while ago. Yeah. But yeah, that was my last indie game dev project. That was my first console game. I solo dev'd it and got it out on the Switch, which is like, a huge honor for my first, and it was my first commercial release too. So my very first paid game, and I put it out on the Switch. So that was a big deal for me. And after that, I decided to hang up the indie thing for a little bit and get a proper studio job. So I'm doing that right now in Pittsburgh. I get to make video games, and I get to get paid for it, and I get to get paid for it and not crunched into oblivion like a lot of game devs out there. So I'm really lucky. I've been able to work from home during COVID. I'm really lucky in that regard too. I've only been in Pittsburgh for a little bit, so it's been an exciting city to explore as much as I can during a plague. And that's, there's been a lot going on in my life for being shut in during a pandemic over the past year or so. And one of those things just so happened to be Nonstandard McDonald's. It was just a silly little COVID side project that I started up back in July of 2020. And it was just something that I was looking for work at the time. And it was something that I had thought of doing every once in a while because a lot of people at one point also knew me for, I wrote this tweet thread about the Cheesecake Factory that just like popped off at one point. People still like, I don't know, at least a couple years ago when I would go to an event or something and I would introduce myself, they would go, "Oh, you're the dude who wrote that thread on the Cheesecake Factory on Twitter." So it was kind of like an identity defying thing for a while. And so Nonstandard McDonald's kind of like emerged from that, because the whole thing about the Cheesecake Factory is, have you been inside one recently? I mean, hopefully not, because, we've been in a pandemic for the past year. But that place is insane inside. It's as wild as any non-standard McDonald's can get. There are, wall sconces that look like the Eye of Sauron. There are allegedly secret messages hidden inside the ceiling murals. There are like giant fake like St. Basil's Cathedral domes. It's crazy. So I got kind of a following for writing about weird themed chain restaurants, as niche as that is. And I got thinking about, I was like, well, there's so many bizarroid, weird McDonald's out there, but the problem with them is that you can't just Google a lot of them. Yeah, and so it was an idea. What if I was like, what if I crowdsourced it? What if I crowdsourced and attempted crowdsourcing, documenting something weird like this? And that's how the account was born. It was more of an experiment than anything, and it really popped off in a way I didn't expect.
So I wanted to ask this. I talk about this in my video, but one of the reasons that I've always had this, like, that, you know, that obsession with the weird McDonald's to stop at during the road trip. One of the reasons I've always had that interest is because I have this childhood memory of visiting a log cabin McDonald's, which I haven't been able to prove actually exists. So I was curious, do you have any sort of, like, you know, interesting history, perhaps from your childhood, with like a specific non-standard McDonald's that made you feel like, you know, whoa, this is kind of cool, you know, or did that just happen as an adult?
The very first non-standard McDonald's that I ever ran into was one that I worked nearby for many years once I was older, but it's one in Independence, Ohio. I'm a Clevelander natively. I come from Cleveland. Independence is about 20 minutes south, and it's this McDonald's that people sometimes refer to as like Mayor McCheese's City Hall, or the McMansion, or something like that. It's this weird pseudo-colonial style building with 2 floors, a chandelier, a spiral staircase, and it's it looks like a bank. It looks like a bank. And that was the very first non-standard McDonald's I ever encountered, just by running into one. And I was like, what's in there? Are there secrets in there? I was like 6 or 7 years old, and it kind of stuck with me. And you know, as time went on, there was another one that was I got to go to when I was in college. I went to college in Chicago, and I got to go to one of my favorite non-standard McDonald's. Even after all this time and all the ones I've seen, I still have a soft spot for this one. It was called McDonald's The Future, and it is located at Navy Pier, which is like a big entertainment kind of tourist trap complex on the Chicago waterfront. And this McDonald's had a plasma globe, a fake Roman entryway, like weird Atlantean alien ceiling paintings, early HD TVs, a laser light show, this weird kind of like edutainment 1990s interior design aesthetic, and a bunch of neon. And it held on for a surprisingly long time. They only remodeled it in like 2017. So I got to go to that one before they standardized it. And so that was the one that really got me thinking, somebody's got to document these. These are absolutely buck wild. And so yeah, I had encountered them by chance, but I was like, there's got to be more out there. There's got to be untold secrets of non-standard McDonald's, and I was right in a way that I never anticipated.
Well, I mean, this was actually going to be my next question. It was going to be, you know, what was the inciting force that made you want to research non-standard McDonald's? So I suppose we've answered that one, unless you have a second answer.
Well, yeah, I could go into a little bit more. I've always been fascinated by kind of design of the mundane, of things we take for granted, and that includes places like a McDonald's. There are so many people who have written into me going, oh gee, I used to go to this McDonald's all the time. I never thought it was weird, but I guess it is weird. And I'm just thinking to myself, dude, your McDonald's has like a Cadillac sticking out of the ceiling and a statue of a dinosaur. You didn't think that was weird? And it never occurs to people, because something as mundane as a McDonald's they take for granted. And I think that's just kind of true in, I don't know, design language and a lot of things we consume. With commercials, for instance. I did a lot of research into the visual language of television and the visual language of graphic design and print design for CROSSNIQ Plus when I was doing research for that game. That game is very much inspired by late 90s, early 2000s Y2K sort of stuff. So I did a lot of research into Y2K stuff, and so much of that didn't have a lot of formal documentation or research or taxonomy done to it, because it was commercial design, and so it was seen as disposable and taken for granted, sort of, just kind of subconsciously digested culturally. And if you point those things out to people in a way that really makes them look at it, they start to notice the unique things, the kind of bold and unusual things about it in a new way. And I thought, what better of a way to reach out to everybody in the country or even the world than something as ubiquitous as a McDonald's? Because they're everywhere, and non-standard McDonald's are everywhere. And so that was kind of my idea. Why McDonald's? That's why I picked that one.
Yeah. Someone suggested this question, but do you have any? Is there any restaurant you have that's not a McDonald's that kind of fits into that vibe? You know, okay. So, like for instance, I grew up with like Cracker Barrels, and Cracker Barrels are all like the same. They're the same gimmick, you know. It's a bunch of like old archaic stuff from, you know, I imagine they go out to yard sales and get that stuff, but everyone is like unique in a kind of beautiful way. The different lawnmowers duct taped to the ceiling. So, you know, I was curious if you had any specific or general franchise themed or unique restaurants like that.
There are so many that have unfortunately gone by the wayside because the golden age of themed dining ended about 10 years ago. It was a strange and beautiful time in human history. And unfortunately, you know, growing up in Ohio, we didn't have a ton of them. And so there were a lot of them I didn't really get to go to. I guess one that you should go to and appreciate while it's still there, if you live near one, is a Rainforest Cafe, because they're probably not going to be around for much longer. Or at least they'll probably going to severely downsize. They already have been. You know, where else are you going to go eat and see strange animatronic woolly mammoths and tyrannosauruses and, you know, neon lights?
I mentioned this in the video, but there was almost I saw a video about this somewhere. I thought it was Defunct Land, but I couldn't find that video. But there was almost a David Copperfield like magic restaurant in New York.
David Copperfield's Magic Underground.
I feel like I recall someone saying that not coming to fruition was like kind of like the turning point in like the era of themed restaurants.
Mm-hmm. It's true. David Copperfield's Magic Underground is really interesting because it got so close to being done, and then everything fell through. There's rumors that you can actually see some of the old theming elements built into a Sbarro's at Times Square, that they're still there, like the last remnants of David Copperfield's Magic Underground, which was going to be this enormous, massive, interactive magic dining theater show with like 2-story props, and it just looked absolutely insane. But yeah, it kind of hit that it hit that kind of saturation point, and a lot of it had to do with the concept of urban entertainment in the 90s not really panning out in the way that a lot of the investors and money people anticipated. A lot of people like to mention Disney Quest as another big one. I actually had the privilege to go to Disney Quest in Orlando before it closed. And it was this massive, bizarre, very 90s, also kind of edutainment-y VR arcade in the late 90s that they were going to open up all over the country. They dug a hole for one in Philly, and they never laid the foundation for it. They just dug the hole where it's going to go. They call it the Disney hole. I think it just recently got turned into a parking lot, but the Disney hole was there for many, many years. So there was a whole buildup of stuff like this, these weird regional entertainment offerings, and everybody had them. Blockbuster had them. Regal Cinemas had them. Of course, you know, Chuck E. Cheese's, obviously, but even things like Fry's Electronics are kind of related to that. Fry's Electronics, also a COVID casualty. They all just closed their stores. There was this whole big surge in that, really inspired by the growing popularity of themed architecture in Las Vegas. That was the big dissemination point. Las Vegas was booming in the 90s. It was trying to become a family destination in the 90s. Themed architecture was all the rage there in Vegas. And people said, well, if you can do it in Vegas, why can't we bring it elsewhere? And then things in Vegas didn't quite go to plan. And it all just kind of cooled down.
I think we watched the same YouTuber who does like, he has like a mini series about Vegas. Mm-hmm. Is it Destination Theme Park? I always get his name
Oh,
wrong.
I watch a ton of theme park YouTubers. Yeah, Destination Theme Park's one of them. I watched Yesterworld, did a little bit about themed architecture. Defunct Land, obviously.
Yeah. The most interesting thing I found out while researching this, excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4, my wrist is messed up. The most interesting thing I found out, and it's mentioned once in one article from a McDonald's no one has ever heard of in Ohio, is they're interviewing the franchisee, and the franchisee goes like, "Oh yeah, McDonald's asked us to do this, so we went with jungle theme," and that blew my mind. Because I have you gone to that one? By the way?
No. The Jungle McDonald's has been gone. But I know the one you're talking about, and I've only found a little newspaper clipping of it.
Yeah, same. It's like it has 2 photos. They're good photos in terms of like newspaper archives, but that's the only. But he's very clear where he's like, yeah, McDonald's wants us to do themed locations for some reason, so we did jungle.
That's interesting. Because a lot of Nonstandard McDonald's are the work of weird franchisees who just kind of get it in their mind.
Well, I guess I could ask, like, you mentioned, I'm on number 6 of my questions. You mentioned that part of the concept for the Nonstandard McDonald's Twitter was like crowdfunding a research project about this topic that there was almost no way to look into properly. What is your research process? Like, what do you do when you research? What tactics have you used to try and find this stuff?
Well, the first thing I do, once I get a submission, is there are a couple of resources for images that I consult, but I don't necessarily use, because with an account this big, you start to get into things with copyright. A lot of people don't really realize. They just send me pictures that they stole from Flickr, and I'm like, no, somebody took those. A photographer took those. I can't use those. So I have to do a little bit of searching and try to find some, more publicly available pictures. But also I consult the Internet Archive a lot to try to find news snippets about it from local newspapers or things like that. I consult a couple of other kind of databases. Local news is like some of the only place you can find coverage of a lot of these places from when they open, and even then, that's kind of a crapshoot.
I was gonna say this directly in the video, but I just didn't, because it's a 49-minute video, so
wow.
Yeah, I was surprised, but it flows really well. Like when you watch it, you don't notice. But one of the reasons that it's so hard to find information about McDonald's is a lot of them, the only evidence you can find is like an internet review from like a really old internet review website or a single newspaper article from when it opened. Mm-hmm. So if you had a themed McDonald's near your home and it opened the week of an actual news headline and then it closed before Yelp existed, it's possible there's zero evidence of it. Because the only I always slow news week, the week that the themed McDonald's opens. But one thing I started doing while researching this for McDonald's, I really couldn't find images of, is I would use the newspaper articles to figure out where the location was supposed to be, and then I'd find that location now, obviously not themed. And then I would get on the road on Google Maps with the first-person view and keep hopping around on the road until I found a place from 2007. Like the first time they ran through with, the Google Maps car. And sometimes you can barely see like a railroad crossing sign. Nonstandard McDonald's did become like a purposeful big part of the McDonald's brand, I feel like. And to the extent that people didn't think it was weird after a while. And so no one took photos or anything. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so hard to research, because no one cared until like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, and the other thing that's true is that when these were really popular, late 90s through, I would say, up about 2008 is when they started to die off. Taking photographs was a lot less trivial than it is now. Early digital cameras were not great, or you had to use a disposable or a Polaroid or whatever. And so I don't think people weren't gathering data casually in the way that they do now. So there's kind of a strange black hole. I call it kind of the internet black hole from like the 1990s up through the late aughts, where there's a whole bunch of strange and weird design of all sorts, whether that be Nonstandard McDonald's or The lost media. I know lost media is a super popular topic to talk about on YouTube because it's got the same kind of thing going on, where the whole concept of digital preservation was still so new or expensive that people didn't really consider it. And also another thing that's true is in the early internet in particular, if you go around early websites, people on the early internet just assumed that everything was going to be around forever.
Yeah, so often now this isn't just McDonald's, but so often when you're researching something, you'll find an old website where they're like, oh, all the information is here, and then they link to a website that's not archived.
Yeah, exactly. So there was the attitude, the cultural attitude about preserving information and documenting information hadn't quite formed, and the tools weren't quite available yet. And so you just have this, and from a corporate standpoint, there wasn't really a lot of incentive to photograph or document. So you have this span of a couple decades where that stuff really just kind of gets lost. And I would say Nonstandard McDonald's kind of falls into that time period as far as its peak popularity.
I wanted to mention this at some point during this, but I found something during my research that made me go, oh my. I basically discovered a unique McDonald's piece of lost media that I realized I've definitely seen.
And what's that?
I looked up the phrase unique McDonald's in Florida, and I found a TV listing on Travel Channel for a TV special about, you're nodding like maybe you have this, but it's like a TV special about like the top 10 unique McDonald's in the world. And I was like, I've seen that. I remember seeing that. I remember they eat at like a diner somewhere.
I haven't seen this.
You really? Well,
No.
I remember seeing this when I was like 9. It was on Travel Channel. And I swear to God, I feel like there's 3 or 4 things in that documentary I've never seen mentioned anywhere else. It's like this little Travel Channel. And I'm sure if you look this up yourself, you'll find, TV guide listings mentioning this. But now I mentioned this in the History Channel. This is a little detour, but like you'd be surprised at how little archive work is also done of like that era of gotcha documentary TV, like the 2012 stuff. It's really surprising how something you saw 5 or 10 years ago just doesn't exist, basically.
And what's true in television in particular, when they were still doing stuff on analog professional video formats before the move over to digital, those tapes were expensive. And so what a lot of this famously, the most famous case of this that a lot of people will know is BBC's treatment of Doctor Who. They shot that on video, and those tapes were expensive. And so when they needed to use another tape, they would just tape over one that they had already shot. And so there was never really an archive maintained of this stuff. And that was really true for all sorts of documentaries, especially ones that never got proper home video releases.
Well, I want to say this. I thought about doing a video about Doctor Who Lost Media because the one thing that I think is the most interesting about that is that the only people who did fan archives of Doctor Who, or the only people who did archives of Doctor Who were the fans who would sit at home with a tape recorder and record every episode. And so we have audio from every single missing episode of Doctor Who because the fans cared more about archiving this stuff than the corporations making the material, which is still true today. I'm sorry, I feel like I interrupted you.
No, not at all. Yeah, you're totally right. And it's even now it's a little different because social media and I know McDonald's is very aware of what I'm doing. We've had contact once or twice. They continually interact with the page, so they understand the appeal of Nonstandard McDonald's.
Yeah, I'm sitting next to a gift bag they sent me because I mentioned I wanted to make a video about this.
Oh yes, I remember you got the gift bag and the little handwritten note.
Yeah, and so it's really weird. I looked it up on Twitter. I managed to find another person who got sent this gift bag. So it's not like it's not like someone's a Quinn Reviews fan. It was that like they send these gift bags out to people who do social media, where they're like, "Yo, I went to the oldest McDonald's in California," and then they were like, "Oh, McDonald's sent me a gift bag because I tweeted about that." And isn't it so weird that it confuses the hell out of me the fact that they're actively encouraging people to spread this element to the brand, but they're also like destroying it quietly.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part of it, is that they see it really as more of a cultural mindshare thing and less of an active brand representation thing. But especially after the 2010s, particularly the late 2010s, were the decade of nostalgia marketing. That's nostalgia marketing really took off in a huge way, and so I think now corporations understand that preserving older materials for the purpose of nostalgia marketing is a worthwhile endeavor, and they have a financial impetus to do so. As cynical as that approach may be, but back in the late '90s, early aughts, they didn't really understand that yet, and so they just didn't bother. They didn't see anything in it for them.
So we're going to get back to all this. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, there's a reason my video is 49 minutes or so. But so my next question is kind of like a more basic one, just kind of like a fun. Okay, so if you had to pick your top 5 favorite, unique McDonald's, ones you've covered and ones you haven't, just name like some. They don't have to be your top 5 of all time. Just like 5 ones you think are interesting off the top of your head.
Okay, well, let me think of a couple. I really like the UFO McDonald's in the UK.
Yeah.
I like that one a lot because the crazy thing about it was that it didn't start as a McDonald's. It started as an original UFO-themed restaurant. They just, were trying to get on the themed restaurant bandwagon, and it didn't work out. And so McDonald's bought it and opened up shop in there.
Wasn't it sorry to interrupt you, wasn't it in like a weird place where there's not even like UFO culture? It was in Cambridge, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was in Cambridgeshire. But yeah, it was this weird kind of anomaly that McDonald's just set up shop in, but it was apparently a really popular hangout spot for teens. I mean, why wouldn't it be? It was this huge like aluminum UFO. And it operated for many years, I do believe, and it just kind of became a fixture of the area. And that's what I liked about a lot of these non-standard McDonald's kind of, became local treasures in a way that and that was really interesting. There's one called I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Meki 100 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I have gotten so many submissions of that I think that's probably the most submitted location I've gotten is the Meki 100.
Even after you've posted it?
Yeah, even after I've posted, because people don't see it. In Sao Paulo.
That's why you retweet all the time.
Yeah, or is it 100? No, it's 1,000. I think. I can't remember. It has a trailing 0, but it's a big number.
Is that the one with like the hanging burger?
Yes, the hanging burger, and they had some like crazy stuff outside, and they had like a McDonald's trailer Airbnb that you could rent for a little bit. I think it's. I can't remember if it's 100 or 1,000. God, you're gonna murder me in post for this, but that's okay. I love that one just because the enthusiasm. It's a modern non-standard McDonald's, and all sorts of influencers in Brazil were there for the opening, and it's still like a super favorite of a lot of people, and it's an example of a modern non-standard McDonald's that's still thriving.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other ones that I really like?
3 more.
Okay,
Let's see if we can do it.
What are some? I'm trying to think of some of the biggest, big, bombastic McDonald's. There's one I can't talk about yet because there's one
spoilers.
that I am saving. I am saving it for a special 150,000 follower special.
We'll count that as one, and and then people can come back and say what that one was.
Yeah, I am looking through the. I really liked the. This was a good story. There was a McDonald's in California. I'm trying to remember exactly where in California it was. It was a. I classified it as the Surf Rock. There we go. It's in Sacramento. The Undersea Surf Rock Dinosaur McDonald's.
People who have seen my video know this one because I talked about it. Okay. It was kind of like the emotional support of the video. Me talking about these two. Me talking about Elvisaurus Rex.
Yes, Elvisaurus Rex. And the crazy plot thread I went down because there was this, for people who haven't seen the video or people who don't know, this McDonald's has a whole lot of stuff in it. and one of the centerpieces is this Elvis impersonating Tyrannosaurus Rex playing a guitar. And it's just a statue in the middle of the restaurant. And so I did a tweet about that. It was really popular. And then later I got, hey, Nonstandard McDonald, you know there's a second one of these, and he's still alive, right? And I was like, no way. And it turned out to be in Walled Lake, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. There he was. I got a picture. There is an exact replica. Actually, the only difference between the two is that the one in Walled Lake had a pair of sunglasses, which I assume was also on the Sacramento dinosaur, but were removed at some point.
I can answer this because I was studying the images. I downloaded a bunch of images of both locations really close, and I have one image from a very specific angle where you can tell he has a bit of sunglasses behind his ear in the Sacramento location.
Oh, there we go.
So the sunglasses got broken off, but they never removed like the piece behind one of his ears. And so I have this written down as a note. I have it written down in this Google Doc at the bottom, Elvisaurus is broken. It blew my mind when I compared the two statues, where I was like, wait a minute, the Elvisaurus we all know is like busted to hell. It's missing the mic, you know?
Yeah, and it was really emotional for me because it was like, oh my God, there's another one of these. The person who submitted it hadn't been in the restaurant for a few months, and I think at the tail end of 2020 they rehabbed it, and he's gone. So both the Elvisaurus Rexes have moved on to the great McPearly Gates.
And it's weird because I have this whenever that happens, and I look into these places. I always have this weird mix of like angst, disappointment, and then like understanding. Because did you look at like the reviews of that location? It's one of the most gross McDonald's in the world.
That's the thing I always find whenever because I often go to Google Photos. For image references, and the reviews of these places are always terrible, universally awful.
Yeah, my thesis statement that I pitch in the video, which as everyone can tell, he hasn't seen the video, but my pitch is that like if it gets to the point where you can build your McDonald's to look like a castle, they're not like checking on to see if you're following health code violations. You know, there's a little bit too much freedom, you know, in some of these places. The weirdest one I think is, and of course this has a big mystery around it. What is the California train miniature?
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. That was going to be my fifth choice. Actually, we're on the same wavelength. Is the Buena Park, California location right near Knott's Berry Farm?
Yeah, famous for having a cool theme and infamous for being one of the grossest McDonald's you can visit.
And also infamous for the mystery of the McThriller.
I did some research about this yesterday, and I'm pretty confident I've half solved it and come to the conclusion that the answer is boring and we shouldn't look into it.
Really? The answer to the McThriller is boring?
Okay, so the big mystery, everyone presumes that McThriller was a McDonald's motion simulator. But I came to the conclusion based on articles that it's not. It's a motion simulator in a McDonald's. Because I feel like we were all looking for a piece of lost media, like a motion simulator ride set in McDonald's land. But articles I found indicated that it was just like generic motion simulator rides that like came with it.
Yeah, and that's ultimately not too surprising, unfortunately. That was the case for a lot of these motion simulator attractions that got built into malls or other places or amusement parks or entertainment centers in the 90s. They were just bought stock and came with stock films. And that's how it's done today still when you see a motion theater. They're usually like that.
The weirdest thing about McThriller is it was this motion simulator that got installed at this McDonald's in 1993. I found an article from 1995 that I just read saying it's still there. But the company that installed it got sold, so it's not like they were doing repairs. But they still advertise it on the building, you know?
Yeah. The sign, the McThriller sign is still there, and there's some remnants. That's what got people so curious about the McThriller. It was what was left behind.
In your tweet, and I feel like I've taken this over without meaning to, but in your tweet you mentioned that there was one in Mexico City.
Yes, I have heard multiple reports of the Mexico City McThriller. I have found no photos. I have found no documentation, but multiple people have told me about it.
Yeah, I figure once you get 5 or 6, a couple emails from people being like, at this location in this place, you have to trust it.
Yeah, that's all you have to go on sometimes because of how obscure
Yeah.
this stuff is.
This was a question. I guess we've gotten to 5, unless you had something to say about the Bueno Park McDonald's.
Oh, I guess I have. I mean, I have one more, and that's the world's largest entertainment McDonald's in Orlando. Not the Epic McDonald's, but the original rendition. The one that because the new one is well and good. Also, I'm trying to get in contact with the people down there for an exciting project, so fingers crossed. I will tell you more about that as it develops. But for those who don't know, the world's largest entertainment McDonald's was a McDonald's on iDrive in Orlando, which is the big stretch where all of the weirdo tourist stuff that isn't Disney or Universal lives. And it was this massive, strange, bizarre McDonald's that had pretty much everything in it you can imagine. It had statues of the McDonald Land characters. It had gators statues. It had a weird indoor jungle. It had a strange play place. You could get pizza. You could get like breakfast croissants. You could get pretty much anything your heart desired for a McDonald's, I think. And it was massive. It was strange. It was dirty and grungy, and I loved it. And they rehabbed it in the early 2010s to be... It's still cool, but kind of the grungy, rogue franchisee, I don't know, mad genius of the original rendition of that McDonald's has been diminished in the new location. And so there's something about me... I never got to go to the original one, but there's something about it that's just so magically chaotic. And I think that captures the spirit of Nonstandard McDonald's really well.
So if you don't want to answer this one, this is a good question, but if you don't want to answer it because of spoilers, is there any McDonald's that you really want to cover, but just like it's eluded you? Like the proper evidence, the proper photos, it's eluded you completely.
There are a couple. I've had a lot of people tell me to cover McDonald's that were at places like Alton Towers in the UK, for instance, has several strange McDonald's. That rainforest McDonald's in Ohio that you mentioned, that's always been frustrating because it's my home state. That's something I've always wanted to cover, but there's really no real evidence remaining. There are a couple others. Of course, again, my spoilerific one, which I can't tell you about yet, that's also has very limited evidence to the point where I'm trying to get in contact with some people from the official McDonald's archives, which exists, by the way. It's in Illinois. It's a real place. They used to have an actual building for it, but I think they're kind of in between permanent homes right now. But the McDonald's archives do exist, and I'm trying to get in contact with the folks there to learn a little bit more about this mystery McDonald's, which you will learn about in due time. But yeah, there are a few of them like that. There are some that I've barely been able to cover. I refer to them as Lost Donalds because I can't find photos of them. There was a Wizard of Oz McDonald's, for instance, that I could only find one picture of.
I tried to look into that one myself as like a gotcha to be like, I could find it, but I couldn't. I found the article. According to the article where you got that photo, it wasn't. It was actually like a movie McDonald's that kind of like leaned towards. Yeah, she goes like it has Wizard of Oz elements, and she says it's like a movie. It's like in that era of movies, so they have
okay, so kind of golden age of Hollywood McDonald's.
But like in terms of decoration, they lean towards Wizard of Oz, and they have like this is a weird thing the article specifically mentioned. It was like a fan blog, but she says that in the back of the restaurant were like collectible Wizard of Oz dolls. That I think were from like an official, it's public domain, but like an official doll collection you could actually get. So clearly the franchise owner just had this doll collection.
Yeah, that's how so many of these start. You know, some franchise owner or some franchise owner's relative or spouse or you know, something like that is just an avid collector of something.
Yeah, I tried to take that angle in the video. I mean, to the point that I remember some of these franchise owner names now, because the two main ones, the two biggest ones, maybe you'll recognize these names. Gary Arthur and Keith Melton are the biggest ones.
Yes, I recognize Gary Arthur. That's Arthur Foods in Florida, which is responsible for many of the weird ones. Yeah,
and then Keith Melton, I think he might be... In some draft I referred to him as the most prolific, but he might not be, but I think he is. He would make a themed McDonald's and then be like, all right, gonna open 5 of these. So he made like 4 motorcycle themed McDonald's.
Yeah, I have run into some duplicates like that.
and he made three sports themed McDonald's, including Mixed Sports Zone. But his most infamous thing is he's like the biggest spy collector in the world, and he opened a spy McDonald's.
I haven't heard of this.
I found a couple. I talk about this in the video. The snippets are so surreal. I found 3 articles I think that mention this, and it's the stupidest idea for McDonald's I've ever heard of. It's legit like the shoes worn by the woman who went to Germany and seduced and killed Nazi spies. And it's like, you can sit next to this with your McDonald's meal.
Whatever gets him in the door. Whatever gets him in the door.
I was really impressed with Hollywood McDonald's. I think that's also his. You can tell which ones are his because they're in southern Florida, and they always feature movie posters.
Oh, those are all Melton's. Interesting.
But I was really surprised by Hollywood McDonald's, and I was so happy that I found that one because you would think everyone would know about that one. I sent you those photos. Yeah. I don't know if you saw them.
Yeah.
But just like, it's a Star Wars McDonald's, and I've never heard about this. And it closed. It closed like 2 years ago because they went in and de-themed it and then closed it.
Huh. That's odd.
It might have been the pandemic because it's a McDonald's in a Walmart.
Oh, yeah, probably. But yeah, I've actually, it's so funny when you sent that to me. I also had like 2 or 3 other people send it to me at the same time. I hadn't run into that one yet. But yeah, that's so funny because it's like almost a quintessentially American thing. You know, these people who are weird hobbyists and collectors who kind of build out their legacy through entrepreneurship, and it results in a line of themed McDonald's filled with movie posters. It is an oddly American tale.
We're going to move on from Hollywood McDonald's, but I just want to say, I want to point this out, that I found the 360 degree, it's on good. Someone needs to get all this off Google Maps because it should not be on, because this location is closed. It was a miracle I could access it. It's in that state where it says permanently closed, but you can still visit it. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it only stays like that for like 2 years.
Yeah.
But there's a 360 degree image of that McDonald's, and I was messing around in there, and Watto is hanging from the ceiling. And that's so funny to me because
the hanging Watto.
No, because there's dozens of photos inside that McDonald's, and that's the only photo of Watto. No one ever took a photo with Watto.
Oh, there you go. I guess that speaks to the image problems that Star Wars Episode 1 experienced.
But yeah, we can move on.
My laptop battery is growing short, and I did not have space to plug it in, so I think we're going to have to make this the final question.
I think we've kind of covered everything by accident. Oh. Okay, so one last question. It's kind of like a 2-parter if you want it to be. So the question is, it's kind of similar to the top 5, but if you could visit any McDonald's in the world right now, what would you go to? And it's 2 different versions. One version is any version that exists right now, and one version that's defunct.
Ooh. If I could go to any McDonald's that was defunct, I would have loved to see. I think it's because it was my formative experience with Nonstandard McDonald's. I would have loved to see McDonald's the Future in Chicago at its prime, when it was doing a light show every 30 minutes on the 30 minutes, when it had strange, like, early HD TVs with, like, they said that, like, visions of space, and the lights would dim, and there's, like, these ancient, like, fake, like, it looks like mist. It looks like mist in there, or it looked like mist in there. There were these weird, like, Greco-Roman neoclassical columns with plasma, like, glass built into the columns. It was this weird thing, and all of it was still there, and, like, the plasma part still worked, but they hadn't done the light shows in decades. And they also had weird experimental dessert concepts and merchandise and things. So I would have loved to have seen that when it was in its prime, to go to a McDonald's with a dinner show and weird 90s edutainment motifs, because that's my thing. And as far as a McDonald's that exists today, I have many reasons to go back to Orlando, so I would love to go to the Epic McDonald's if I got a chance. McDonald's, if you're listening, please bankroll my flight there, and I will make it worth your while. And there are also some, there's some broad, like, I don't know, McDonald's abroad. Like, I would love to see the Mecca 1000 in Brazil. Just like the ones that exist today that are big and ostentatious and spectacle. Those are the ones that are so rare, and those are the ones I would really love to check out in person.
I feel like my answers would be real quick. My answers would be, I really want to see Dead Body McDonald's.
Oh, yes, the catacombs.
I like any McDonald's where you can do it into the rock and roll. I like any McDonald's.
Yeah, I do that. I do that subconsciously when I post them all the time.
I really want to see that someday because I feel like Dead Body McDonald's would be a really fun clickbait title.
Yeah.
And then my other one, this might be cheating, but I mentioned this. I went to a log cabin McDonald's. I believe it's in my memory. It might be a lie that my memory told me in North Carolina.
In North Carolina. Interesting.
But I feel as no one else in the world has had that experience. And I remember a teacher telling us a story of going there herself and being like, yeah, I was in North Carolina, blah, blah, blah.
Well then.
But so I would like to go there just to feel like I'm not crazy and I didn't make that up. But it might not be a place that existed, so.
I'll keep my eyes open to see about the submissions. The only log cabin one I've encountered is the one in the Wisconsin Dells that's still open. But everything's a log cabin in Wisconsin Dells, so that's not super special to the people who are there.
We didn't really record an outro for this, so I'm gonna do it in the future. If you like this interview, don't forget to follow the Nonstandard McDonald's Twitter account and also my personal Twitter account for more stuff like this. If the Nonstandard account gets to 150,000 followers, they're gonna do a special big episode, and I would really like to know what that is, so do consider going down and showing them some love. And while you're going down to the description, be sure to hit subscribe so you can see more of my epic second channel content. With that, I've been Quentin Ree 2s, and that's all you 3s.